Ready? Wonderful. Welcome everyone to the Art Museum of Southeast Texas. My name is Caitlin Clay and I am the Curator of Exhibitions here at AMSET. I am so happy to welcome you to our Fall 2024 exhibition, Harry Ahysen Devices for Study. Now today we will be taking part in our Taste the Arts program. For those of you who are new to the program, or for those of you watching online, Taste the Arts is a program that we host quarterly, where we invite a Lamar professor to come and speak about a topic of their choice that relates to the exhibitions on display in our main galleries. And today I am so excited to welcome and introduce our speaker, Eric Johnson. Here to my right, to your left. Eric Johnson is an American artist, designer, and educator from Port Arthur, Texas. In 2003, he earned his BFA in studio art with a concentration in painting from Lamar University, Vermont. In 2006, he earned his MFA in studio art with a concentration in drawing and painting from Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Upon graduation, he was awarded the Henry Walters Traveling Fellowship, which sent him to Berlin for a month to study German expressionist painting and contemporary German art and culture. In 2007, Eric moved to New York City, where he began a 15-year career designing home textiles for mass market retailers such as Bed Bath & Beyond, Target, and Dillard's. His most recent design work was for Walmart, where he designed fully assorted collections of throw pillows, area rugs, and window curtains for the Better Homes and Gardens brand. His product can be found in all 3,500 Walmart superstores in the United States. His pattern designs are also featured in the indie film Brigsby Bear, starring Kyle Mooney of SNL fame, and he created a wallpaper design commissioned by Todd Solondz, the director of films such as Welcome to the Dollhouse and Happiness. Along with his career in design, Eric has maintained a studio art practice focused primarily on drawing. His most recent drawings are made with oil pastels over pencil on tinted paper and function like a diary, emphasizing routine yet meaningful moments within his lived experience. Older drawings have addressed his fascination with a range of subject matter, including visionary architecture, textile design, emergency preparedness, aka prepping, horror, and the paranormal. In 2010, his work was selected for the Drawing Center's Viewing Program Artist Registry in New York City. In 2015, his illustrations were published in Bark Kira, a Simpsons-inspired collaborative recreation of the acclaimed sci-fi manga series Akira. In 2017, his work was exhibited at the Andrew Edlin Gallery in New York City. His most recent exhibitions include the 39th Annual International Exhibition at the University of Texas at Tyler, created by Brandon Zach, and Generations, a two-person exhibition at the East Texas Art Center, where he is an active board member. Eric is currently a visiting assistant professor in Lamar University's Department of Art and Design, where he has taught courses on illustration, pattern design, and brand identity. He currently teaches foundational drawing and 2D design and is also the advisor to Artist Common, the art department's student organization. Please join me in welcoming speaker Eric Johnson.
Hey, thank you so much to Caitlin and the Art Museum of Southeast Texas for inviting me to speak to you today. I think the Taste of the Arts lecture series is incredibly important because what it does is it connects art professionals to the public at large, and that just serves to strengthen our local creative community. And if there's ever a time for us to be strengthened as a community, I think it's now. So I feel very honored to be a part of this and to have been asked to be here. And I want to thank y'all for being here too. I know we all have busy schedules, and I hope I don't bore you. So, anyone a fan of Cezanne, the painter? Okay, so quite a few. Okay, good. Cezanne factors kind of heavily in the show here from Harry Ahysen, and particularly Cezanne's landscape work. And so I wanted to just share a little bit about Cezanne to sort of help connect this work to that prominent figure. So Cezanne was a French sort of modernist painter. In fact, Picasso called him the father of us all. So he's really known for introducing elements of abstraction, particularly into the landscape. Cezanne was born and raised in southern France, in a town called Aix-en-Provence, and it's about 20 to 30 miles north of the Mediterranean. So kind of like us, we're kind of close to the ocean. And so Cezanne was born and raised in this town. He studied art in Aix-en-Provence, and he, after growing up there, he moved to Paris. So the big city, the urban area, and he moved back and forth between Paris and Aix-en-Provence because he had sort of a love-hate relationship with these places, right? So he moved to the city. It's really intense, kind of a gritty place. He'd get overwhelmed or tired, and he'd move back home. And so he throughout his lifetime, his career, he would often switch back and forth. At the end, he had a studio space, and he lived in his hometown, and eventually passed away there. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing that he always came back, right? He went, and he came back, and went away. Interesting also is that his hometown did not like him very much. He was known as kind of a brute. He was irritable, fussy, difficult guy. And in fact, there's a story about his relationship with models. So he had to hire models to work for him. But he was tough on his models. And so he had them work really long hours with little pay and very few breaks. So there's a story about how one day one of his models sneezed during a pose, and he flew off the handle and he fired her on the spot, right? So, and in a small town, word travels fast. So he really was not particularly popular. And in fact, this town, Aix-en-Provence, is very conservative, a small market town. And he was kind of a wild painter. His physical appearance was rough. He had long, straggly hair. He had drab clothes. He had paint on. And so he was not hard to miss in his hometown. So he was not popular. He was very disliked. And one day he decided to go out and paint his favorite mountain. He had a favorite mountain, and that is pronounced Mont Saint-Victoire. I may have butchered that, and that's the last French that I'll give you today. But he had this one mountain, and we know it was his favorite mountain because he painted it more than 80 times. That's more than any other subject in his career. So he found inspiration in this landscape of his home. And so he's out there painting this mountain. But he was followed. He was followed by some of the townsfolk, probably because he tipped somebody off. And they started to tease him, to bully him. And so he's painting, he's fully engrossed in this process, and he tries to just sort of blow it off. But they are persistent. And so they begin to stone him. So they pick up stones, and they begin pelting Cezanne, our modern master, right, with these stones. And he can no longer ignore being smacked in the back of the head with rocks. And so he grabs his brushes, hands full of brushes, he rears up on he falls on his feet, and he turns around, and he lifts up his brushes, and he begins to yell really, really loud, almost like you might do with a bear, or a bear attack. Anybody had incidents with a bear? Apparently that's what you're supposed to do. I obviously not. But You're supposed to rear up and yell really loud. So he does this, and then he begins to chase these townsfolk away. And they freak out because he's kind of a wild guy. And so he chases them out, and I mean, maybe if it was me, I would have caught one and sort of, gave him the what for, but anyway, so I think that anecdote is kind of interesting because it sort of illustrates his dedication to his place, to his landscape. He had his mountain, and he could not be disturbed, right, unless there were rocks being thrown at you. There's one more story about Cezanne, and I think it's also interesting. He would go out on location. He would paint plein air. Anybody familiar with what plein air is? Do you know what that means? Okay, it basically means painting in the open, or as we might say, on location. So he was on location in the countryside near his home, and he's in this field, but it's someone else's field, so he's trespassing. And so he's painting, he's set up his easel, he's set up his paints, and he's found this perfect angle of his perfect mountain. And the farmer comes along and says, no, get off my property, you're not welcome, right? No one likes Cezanne. And Cezanne, being the stubborn, sort of difficult guy that he was, he said, no, I'm not going to move. And the farmer says, well, I wasn't asking you, I'm telling you, get off my property. And Cezanne again says, no, I'm not going to move. I found my place. I found this one POV of my favorite space, and I'm going to continue on. And the farmer says, well, I'm going to stick my dogs on you. And then Cezanne says, okay, I'll move. So he relented and did the smart thing by leaving. But again, I think a sense of place, an appreciation of where you come from, being affected by the landscape and the weather and the colors and the textures. Cezanne knew it, and obviously Harry also knew it here as we look around. So as I talk about some of the works, my favorite works in the show, this idea of a sense of place is kind of a common thread throughout. So that leads me to the first painting that I want to talk about. And what I did is I chose 3 works. These 2 here, and there's one around the corner. And so I just want to sort of casually talk about these 3 paintings. So as I'm talking, if you have anything to say or you have a comment or a question while we're in front of the works, I invite you to just speak up or raise your hand or interject. We're having a casual conversation here, hopefully. So, and that's the way I treat my classes too. Let's talk it out. Let's have a good conversation about this work because it's meaningful stuff. So when I look at work, the first thing I tend to do with any work, whether that's a painting or a drawing or a sculpture or installation or video or whatever, I get excited by ideas. I get excited by the concepts or the subject matter or the content, really. That stuff has to pull me in first. I get hooked in, kind of like a good song or a melody. And once I'm hooked in, I then start to investigate the way the artist is communicating that content or that message to me. And that comes in the formal aspects like color and line and shape. In my classes, we talk about the elements of art and the principles of design. Yeah. Who all's familiar with the elements of art and the principles of design? Good, you definitely should be. Okay, I'll give you a brief overview. So the elements of art are your line, shape, form, value, color, texture, space. There's 7 of them. They have kind of a sing-song rhythm to them. Line, shape, form, value, color, texture, space. And I associate the elements with food. I love to eat. And so I think about making a meal. And your elements of art are kind of like the ingredients. So the corn, the peas, the onions, etc. And in order to make a good meal, you have to have a recipe. And so our recipe is our principles of design. Principles are balance, unity, movement, proportion, and emphasis. And when you combine the elements with the principles, you should have a pretty delicious meal. But you have to plate it somehow. You have to organize those things in a way. And that's where we talk about composition. Now we need the plate that the meal sort of sits on. So you have all of your elements and principles sort of being arranged artfully on the picture plane, and that should equal to a good meal. But anyways, all that to say is that when I look at work, I think about content, ideas, subject matter first, and then that leads me that makes me want to investigate how they're speaking to me, and sort of the elements and the principles that they use to do that. So, I'm gonna start here with Beach House. And the first thing I think about when I look at this painting, to be honest with you, it is my dream home. I love this house. I love the fact that it's old, right? So it's a classic American farmhouse, probably built around the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, but probably early 1900s. I love that it's a two-story house. I love that it's got an attic. I love the steep roof to it. I love the gray shingle. I love the porches. Of course, maybe my dream house would have a wraparound porch, but whatever, we work with this. And I love the windmill, because that sort of tells me that maybe it's a little self-sufficient, right? Maybe a little DIY or off the grid, maybe if we're talking about prepper stuff, which I love. So I love this house, and I can imagine owning this particular house. But then as I look closer, I start to see holes in the house. I start to see light filtering through that shouldn't be there, right? So I shouldn't be able to see daylight through the roof of the house. And I shouldn't be able to see directly through the house through some of these windows. And that leads me to believe that this house is in a major state of disrepair. And another word for that is dilapidated, right? A great word that I love. But also it makes me think about ruins. So the ruins of a thing. And when I think about ruins, I think about art history. I love art history. And I think about romanticism. Anybody familiar with the art movement of romanticism? Okay. Romanticism happened in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And it was a group of artists that were reacting against classicism. So classical ideals, perfection. And artists at the time, you can't live up to perfection. It's very difficult. And so they wanted to explore emotion. They wanted to explore humankind's relationship to nature, which is also kind of an emotional thing. And in Romanticism, they paint about and they talk a lot about sort of the enormity of nature, the incomprehensibility of how big it is in relation to mankind and all of our ambitions and the things that we build. And we build up and we build up, and then nature invariably comes in, crashes it down, takes it away. And so we build again, right? We rise up, we build again. And all of human history is just this sort of trajectory, building, destruction, building again, and so on and so forth. And so in this painting, I think about this idea of the ruin and how it talks about our ambitions and our drive to create, but ultimately there's a futility about those actions. So I'm interested. I'm fascinated. Also, this house is kind of creepy, right? It's a little creepy. It feels a little haunted. And I love haunted houses. Does anybody live in a haunted house? Yes. Okay. All right. We're gonna talk. In my ideal house, I would have a ghost. As weird as that sounds, but I love ghosts. I love the concept of ghosts. But anyways, it feels a little haunted. And along that line, it feels like somebody built this house. Maybe they loved this house. Maybe this was their dream house, and now it's empty. And so there's something sad about that predicament, and maybe haunted by the memories of the good times before it's fallen into disrepair or dilapidation. So I'm hooked, right? The ideas have got me. How now can I look at the physicality of the painting and how and the messaging that the artist is presenting to me to also communicate this idea of ruin, of dilapidation? So I look primarily at the texture. So I look at the texture of the way this painting was painted, and I look at color. And I'm looking primarily, we'll talk about texture first, but I look at the way that the artist is laying down paint, and sort of the brush marks. And everything in this painting has kind of a wobbly feel to it, right? We can use straight edges, we can create very crisp, clean lines, even in oil paint. But this artist has decided to go a different route. And so everything in this painting has sort of, it's almost structurally unsound, just the way it's painted. And I think that's really smart the way Harry did that, because that's what he's saying conceptually, right, in terms of content. So he's using the forms to communicate his content. They're married in a successful way, in my opinion. In terms of color, I think this is a fantastic sort of example. If you sort of close your eyes or squint your eyes and you look at this painting, you'll notice that the colors in the house and the colors in the sand are very similar, right? You've got some titanium whites, you've got some sort of maybe vanilla tones, some buff tones in there. But if you squint, it's almost as though the sand itself were pulling that house down with it, right? It's reclaiming its original landscape, and the house has to come down. So I think there's also something a little creepy about that, which I like. But then I look at the sky, and that sky is this really saturated, intense, like a cerulean blue. And that sky is so cheerful that it contrasts against the sort of sad neutrality of the house and the landscape. And I love that tension. And in fact, Harry talks a lot about tension and how compositional devices create a much needed tension in a work of art. It keeps the viewer on their toes. And so I feel like Harry has combined or paired formal characteristics with conceptual characteristics so well in this one work of art. And that's why I love it. Any questions about this? Okay, we're good. All right, fine. Fantastic. So I'm going to move just right here. And I'm going to talk about this painting. And the first thing I think about is refineries, obviously. It's in the title, oil refinery. But it's personal for me. So my dad worked in the oil business. He worked for Gulf for many years. And then he went to work for FINA, which then turned into Adafina. But he eventually retired from his work there in FINA. And this work is tough. It's tough work. In fact, anybody work shift work here? Okay, shift work. So you'll know that shift work it's odd hours, and you're going sort of back between leaving early and late, and early and late. And working shift work is also difficult for families, because it disrupts sort of the normal flow of things. I remember having to creep around the house to be quiet so that I wouldn't wake Dad because he's sleeping in the middle of the day, because he had a strenuous shift at night. Around the holidays, it's tough. I remember having Christmas Christmas Eve at night, because he would have to go to work immediately afterwards, and then we'd have Christmas in the morning with my grandma. But I think about sort of sacrifice that my dad made for our family, so that we could live a modestly comfortable lifestyle. So that's sort of the first hook that gets me. And of course, this is part of our sense of place as well. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in this area that isn't somehow connected or touched by the oil industry. So I think this one image is really a fantastic representation of that. So again, in the content portion, I'm hooked. I'm excited by this one work. So what is the artist doing physically or visually that keeps me interested and continues to communicate these things to me visually? So the first thing is I think about the fact that it's watercolor. And I think watercolor is a really interesting medium to choose for painting architecture, right? Architecture is structural, it's sound, it has a bold physical presence, and you might think that a painter would want to paint with oil or acrylic, or maybe a more solid structural medium. Just the nature of watercolor, I think, is interesting because with oil and acrylics, you're sort of pushing that paint around with a brush, but with watercolor, you have to lead the paint around the picture frame or the space within the picture. So you have to wet the paper in weird ways in order to let that water flow into it. So it's sort of a different relationship that you have with watercolor versus more gel or solid mediums like oil paint. So I think it's fascinating that you used watercolor for this particular work, just because of that sort of contrast between structure and architecture, but also watery and flowy. I think about how he's using these sort of, you got some blue grays, you've got this really nice cobalt, you've got a warm gray, a light gray, and then another darker gray, and how that sort of creates a little bit of a rhythm at the top of the composition. And then my eye follows down and follows the contours of this the skyline here. And side note, I love the fact that this image was paired with this bit of instruction, because I spent 15 years in New York, and so I'm intimately familiar with living with skylines, and it's one thing. It never gets old, right? You're always sort of marveling at the enormity of these structures, and your eye is following sort of this movement up and down like he has here, and there's a sense of rhythm and movement to living and looking at skylines, and I definitely find that here. So for me personally, these two images speak to my past and my sense of place as well. One more bit about this. He takes this color, this more saturated color, here at the top, and then he has these like a viridian green and maybe some sap greens, maybe a little bit of olive down here, and he connects this really bold cobalt with these greens with some aqua, and so he's leading our eye from the top of this composition down into the bottom, so that we don't sort of get lost in this intense movement following these architectural shapes. So again, I really do enjoy this particular image. I think these work really well together, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. Any questions about these? Thoughts or comments? Okay, good. Let's move. I got one more. We're good on time? Good. Okay. This last painting is a little watercolor, and the first thing I think about when I see this painting is snow. And for those of us that came from this area, snow is that frozen stuff that falls from the sky. And I do know, actually, here lately, you guys have had a lot more snowage, if that's the right word. You've had a lot more, but when I was growing up here, I'm from Florida, when I was growing up here, it was, you get a light dusting, and that's it, and it would melt very quickly. So my relationship to snow really comes to play when I moved up north. And when you live in a city where it snows, you know that cities are like gray, concrete, and glass, and steel. So they're very sort of dark, oftentimes dirty places. And so when it snows, that snow comes down and it changes everything visually. Every surface is blanketed in soft, white, pristine, beautiful, almost magical snow. It changes your entire experience visually of that environment. And so I like that sort of that change from dark and dirty to magical, right? The other thing it does is it blankets everything in the city. And if you've lived in the city, you know that cities are very noisy. They're very loud. There's always yelling, there's music, there's honking, you name it. It is noisy 24/7. And so the snow comes down and it blankets the city and it makes everything eerily quiet, right? It makes everything peaceful and quiet. And you couple that with the experience, the visual experience of snow, brightness, the sun reflects off of the ice crystals. You have to wear sunglasses, right? It's just sort of an incredible thing of first snow. And then the second day, it gets gross. It goes south, right? It collects pollution, it collects garbage, animals pee in the snow, right? Don't snow. Humans do the same thing too sometimes, which is pretty gross. So that beautiful sort of pristine thing quickly transitions into something really gnarly, and then it turns to sludge, and then it gets all over your clothes and your feet, and then you track that junk inside. It's a hot mess. But that first snow, I think, is really an amazing thing. And so that's how I enter into this work. I think of this bright, pure, beautiful, crisp sort of snowscape. And in fact, it is called Snowscape. That's the title. Harry talked about this, or this was curated in such a way that we can compare Harry's talk about negative and positive space with this work, which again I think is really brilliant, the way that the show was curated and hung. I definitely connect this positive negative space with this painting, but I would say because I identify with the snow, or I'm excited by that idea more, instead of this being positive space, right, versus negative space, I think I want to flip it for me. I think for me, the most interesting parts are sort of that effect, that sort of emotional effect that I get from looking at a beautiful snowy landscape. And so I like the idea that I, as a viewer, have agency enough to be able to look at it from different perspectives. In terms of formal aspects, any watercolorists here? Okay. I have worked with watercolor. I'm not a watercolorist per se, but it is an incredibly difficult medium to master, right? And I definitely feel like Harry has mastered the technical aspects of watercolor in that he's able to communicate this sense of brightness, but also contrast. And one thing you'll notice here in this painting is that it's not just snow. You have trees, right? But then you have growth, right? And this painting begins to talk about transition periods from winter to spring, right? Things are changing, the world is changing, just like the second day after a New York snow, it transitions into garbage, right? But this is a much sort of softer, prettier comment on transition, I think. And I just thought that was really interesting, this idea of a sense of place, identifying with a landscape in so many different ways. And I really could talk a lot about many of these other works in the show, particularly the drawings. But I don't have all the time in the world, and these are up here on the wall. So, any questions? Yes.
I'm a watercolorist, but a lot of people are intimidated and scared to do it. They told me that. I also find it to be one of the most luxurious experience, is to watch the paint move on the paper. I know you're not a straight line watercolorist, but what do you see as the paper being the most important thing in working in watercolor?
Great question. So with watercolor, that pigment soaks into the paper. It's very difficult to lift it up, right? And so you have to work light to dark. So there's that process of, you have to consider where those layers are going to be laid down, because once they're on there for the most part. And so here, the artist is using this sort of warm, soft white as the base, and all of these colors are sort of built on top of it. In oil paint, I know light sort of comes through those layers, and it creates a richness or a depth to a work of art. You could tell me more if that happens with watercolor as well. It does, yes. So we're able to experience this sort of really intense, beautiful, soft, subtle white through that layering process. But really, it shows a bit of restraint from the artist. How much of that white do I want to leave on the surface? How much of that contrast between the white space versus what I would say for him would be the subject matter, would be the trees and the flowers. But I'm really interested in the snow and that sort of process of transformation. I also love how these flowers, these sort of spring growths, are bleeding into the snow. The snow is melting, maybe, turning to liquid. And so, I think it's fantastic that he used a liquid medium to sort of illustrate that process, that change from one state to the next. Good.
Related question.
Yeah.
Watercolor is, I think, an appropriate place for the question, but it really applies to all the works in the show, the ones you've been discussing. How do you see the relationship between freedom and control and painting and drawing in these works? Do you see it as kind of an alternation, the way you were describing urban and rural settings, or are they working, in tandem?
I'm sorry, what was that first
Can you
part?
talk a little bit more about how you see the relationship between painting and drawing and freedom and control? You mentioned kind of a tension in a lot of these works. What are any further observations on that?
Sure.
I mean, you've been discussing it already a little bit. I think that, to me, those are some of the most interesting elements of some of the works in this show.
Right.
That tension that is created between that kind of, I don't know if it's a balance or more of an imbalance, but it's kind of a controlled imbalance.
Between the different mediums or approaches to painting?
Between the different approaches in terms of controlled drawing and that sort of, freedom, distortion.
Right. I think
Creative flow.
across the entire exhibition, you have different levels of control or sort of maybe looseness or openness with the brushwork. You have some of these works, the artist had an intent and they went for it, and you don't necessarily, it's not communicating a sense of spontaneity, maybe. Some other works lend themselves, I think, to spontaneity. And the great thing about oil paint is that you can push it around, you can build on it, you can scrape it down. So it's incredibly versatile medium. But visually accessible to everyone. I stress drawing so much in my classes, preliminary drawings, right? So you don't just start on a finished piece. You sort of work your way into it. You start with thumbnail sketches. You start with you take your thumbnail sketch and then you bring that into a preliminary sketch, and only then do you start working on the final piece after you have a really strong idea about where that work is going. And I think, as we know, the sketching process, the study process, the ideation of these works, I love having those here because we get to see that intimate process, unrefined, emotional maybe even. I mean, he wrote some things, you know, you can look through an artist's sketchbook and see what they're thinking, when they're thinking, and how they're thinking. And that sometimes doesn't translate or find its way totally into the finished work. So, yeah, and you know, in the city, you find artists sketching from life all the time, right? Because there's so much life, there's so much going on in the city. So I definitely, I did a lot of sketching when I lived in New York City. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and I appreciate your discussion of the pairings of the drawings and the paintings too. It is an incredibly curated show, and the pairings are really just great to spend time observing those similarities.
Yes?
Not really a question, more an observation, but I was thinking about the artworks that you chose to talk about, and something that I'm seeing between all the three that I saw you talk about is there's like something interesting happening with the edges in the paintings.
Yeah.
Like there's the lost and found edges. I think with watercolor, I mean, quite evidently because it kind of leads itself to that, but even in the oil painting of the cabin you were talking about, you were describing how like the blue of the shadow of the house kind of blends into the sky, and the white kind of blends into the sand. And so I thought that was really interesting, and that I see that commonality of those lost and found edges.
Right.
And kind of like where things meet and how they meet.
Oh, yeah.
That was interesting.
I mean, you can communicate so much through edges, right? Edges of things. Soft edges say one thing, hard edges say another thing. I like to think of colors migrating sort of around a canvas and how that leads your eye from one part of the picture plane to the next. A lot of my works actually function kind of like vignettes where the edges are left a little bit more open. Because I sort of think of moments, and you're in a space, and you have a limited amount of time, and so you sort of focus on the main parts, almost dreamlike how maybe some of the edges open up towards the corners of the picture plane. So yeah, I think it's a good observation. I definitely see that as a thread. Yes.
So I have an observation too, and I think he has a sensitivity to seasonal atmosphere. So like the first piece that you talked about, it was down at the beach, but the sky was a dark, deep blue, which you only see in the winter months because of the humidity typically that we see down here. And then like looking like at this painting here, it looks more like it might be more of a summery type atmosphere. So I noticed that he has a real sensitivity to the humidity in the air and the seasons.
Right, absolutely.
And
that was one thing.
Sorry, and piggybacking on what Lynn was saying, you can sort of see like his pinks. He's a very big fan of pinks and blues, and you can kind of see how he uses the colors to kind of, notate what seasons, or like what Lynn was saying with the dark blue sky,
Seasons are one thing that I didn't fully quite understand until I learned this. We're pretty limited in our seasons, and we have them, but some parts are very, very brief. And so you do start to really appreciate the light from it stays longer, right? A different kind of light that stays longer, that lives with you a little bit. And I totally agree. I definitely appreciate the sense of seasons. I was thinking about that really intense blue sky sort of behind the house. After a storm, have you ever noticed how good the weather is after like a torrential storm or a hurricane. It's kind of weird that you have to go through this like really dark experience with nasty, volatile weather, and then the next day it's like the most beautiful day, right? And so I kind of that was sort of what I was thinking in relation to that particular work was again sort of a transition within one place that you get to experience.
Can't really escape the season, so you just have to enjoy it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. If you can afford to summer somewhere else,
Appreciate the weather.
that's right. That's right. I agree. Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys for being here again. I appreciate your time, and I hope this was helpful or at least very nice.
Thank you so much. I really love this theme of the centrality of place. I love the stories about Cezanne. I didn't know he was such a curmudgeon. But it's really interesting too that when you and I were speaking before this program that you came from Port Arthur, Harry also came from Port Arthur, and you often, both in your artistic career, sort of traveled and went other places, but still sort of came back into these areas at certain points in your lives. Yeah. So before I let you all go, I just have a couple of comments and public announcements. If this is your repeat visit to the exhibition, thank you so much for coming multiple times. We really appreciate it. If this is your first time to the exhibition, we are so glad that you're here. I really hope that you'll take some time after this program to walk around the show, sort of compare the sketchbook images that are on the walls that are paired with the paintings that we have here. These sketchbook images are drawn from a sketchbook textbook that Harry published in 1970 called Composition Devices. And the exhibition is actually curated around the categories he created within that sketchbook. And you can see the actual sketchbook at the opening of the exhibition. There's also an iPad where you can scroll through and see all of the pages. And he created this textbook for his students. And so he was a professor at Sam Houston University for a very long time, over 30 years. And he created this early on in his career for his students to practice their sketching in order to create their sort of finalized compositions. And we hope that you'll look through it as well. Many of our paintings came from private collections. A lot of Harry's family members actually lent us these paintings. We also have paintings from Sam Houston University, which we are so grateful to them for lending the pieces to us. So this is kind of a one-time opportunity to see many of these artworks because they're not going back to public collections like other museums and institutions. The show does close at 5 p.m. on Sunday, so we will be rolling into a brand new quarter with 2 new exhibitions that open December 21st. So we hope you'll return to come and see those shows. They're going to be absolutely excellent. If you haven't had a chance to walk around the museum, we have a brand new Mexican folk art nativity scene that just opened yesterday, and that's in our education gallery, so you can see that as well. And then lastly, as you walk out, please consider picking up one of our free gallery guides. We still have a lot of them. There's an essay in here written by Donna Tennant, who is one of the art critics for the Houston Chronicle. She wrote a great essay about Harry and his artworks. And then if you're thinking about Christmas gifts, please consider a membership to the Art Museum of Southeast Texas for yourself or for any of your friends or family. We always have free admission. These programs are free, but we still need to have funds to help support them. So you can pick up one of these brochures at the front desk, or you can always give us a call. And then lastly, because I know y'all are ready for lunch, our gingerbread workshop is going to take place tomorrow from 10 to 12:30, and we still have a lot of spots open. So please call the museum or talk to the front desk if you would like to sign up to be a part of our gingerbread workshop. It's going to be a ton of fun. We have a professional pastry chef who comes in and leads the program, and you can have up to 2 people per gingerbread house. So please consider attending that event. And actually, lastly, the second part of our program is if anyone would like to join us for lunch, Two Magnolias, who runs our cafe, has a buffet. Now you're going to have to pick up your own tab, but you can join me and Professor Eric Johnson, and we can continue our conversations about the show and anything you'd like to talk about. So please feel free to join us in the cafe for lunch. Thank you all so much.